Hey, so this is Sarah from Bringing Up Book Lovers, and today we are actually reviewing The Long Shadow by our very own Phyllis Wheeler. So Phyllis is not here to help review her book, so we have a guest. Her name is Sherry Postil. Sherry, can you take a few minutes to introduce yourself?
Hey there. Yeah, sure. I serve on the board of the St. Louis Writers Guild. I'm vice president of contest. I'm an active member of the St. Louis Publishers Association. I am a published author. Write both fiction and nonfiction. My forte is middle grade. So I'm really excited about this book that Phyllis wrote because her and I both write for the same audience.
Mhm. Yes. So you're the perfect person to help review it as well. I'm just going to give a brief summary of the book, and if I missed anything, just feel free to fill in. So there's the main character is a 14-year-old boy named Richie, and he actually lives in the St. Louis area in like a mostly white suburban section of of our city. And he has he's not super happy with his life, and he ends up traveling through time, and he's 50 years in the past in the woods, and he's a boy scout, so he knows a little bit about survival, but he's not 100% able to survive off the land by himself. But he runs into this man who's been living in the woods for a long time, a black man named Morris. And given like where he's from, how he grew up, he really isn't sure how to trust this man and whether to, and doesn't know his history. But they develop a relationship and get to know each other and get to trust each other, and actually are kind of codependent in a lot of ways. And Morris hasn't really had a lot of human contact, so they become friends. Um, and he finds out that Morris's life was greatly shaped by an event even further in the past, in the 1920s, when his grandfather was lynched. So Richie has, figured out, I'm traveling through time, and he figures out how to do it. And he's kind of resolved to seeing if he can travel back to this time before Morris's grandfather was lynched, and see if he can do something to help his friend, to help shape the future, which is his current present, so that his friend doesn't feel like he needs to be living in the woods away from his family in fear. Um, yeah, is that a pretty good summary, do you think?
I would say absolutely. I would say
Okay.
it's a wonderful story about, I mean, obviously Richie is struggling with the loss of his parents as well. And that's one of the reasons he's unhappy with being at home. And I know a lot of kids have gone through that. So his
Mhm.
life has been upheaved quite a bit. The aunt he's living with isn't particularly friendly towards him. Absolutely, you're correct.
Mhm.
I loved it because the beginning of the book reminded me, and I don't even know if that many people will remember this, but there was a book called The My Side of the Mountain, which was very popular. And it's the beginning of the book definitely brought memories of My Side of the Mountain, which was one of my favorite books as a young girl. I
Mhm.
loved it. So Richie's attempt to survive, shooting rabbits and then meeting Morris, and the whole implications of the time that he finds himself in is just fascinating, just absolutely fascinating. I think kids are going to love being taken on this journey, even though the theme is very deep and it does deliver a very important message.
Yeah. So My Side of the Mountain was actually one of the books that, when I was in elementary school, made me realize that I loved reading. And I agree. It does have kind of like, for kids who like enjoy the survival kind of stories, and what would my life be like if I could rough it in the wilderness. This was definitely had tones of that. Can you talk about more specifically about some of the themes that come out in this book?
Yeah, obviously we just discussed very quickly that he's lost his parents. So there's a theme of grief that's going on right there, the changes that he's had to undergo. And then he finds himself in 1969. I love when he sees cars going by and he says, oh, there must be one of those old car conventions because I know where I live several times a year. 44 is just loaded, Highway 44, with antique cars going to the car show over in Pacific. So it's wonderful. And that's what he assumes. And then he realizes that he's time traveled. And that's a great shock for him. And he meets a black man. I love the way, gosh, there's several times in the book where he says, or at least leads us to believe, wow, things haven't changed that much regarding the cultural issues
Mhm.
that he runs into. First of all, he's afraid of Morris right away. One of the reasons he's afraid of him is because he's a black man. And so we deal with those cultural issues. It's very culturally charged. Again, it's a very important message. And then he is determined that he's going to help Morris because Morris helps him learn to live in, Yeah, I think you're right. They're kind of codependent.
Hmm.
Morris hasn't seen anybody in a long time, and Richie isn't really that. Um, he's good, but he's not that great at living on his own out in the woods. So they do get together, and when he finds out and he realizes what happened in 1923, he determines to go back if he can travel and help Morris's family. So I'm not even sure that the lynching of James Scott in Columbia, Missouri is that well known. I've mentioned it to several people, and I'm surprised
Hmm.
that it wasn't that well known. So I'm going to be really excited to find out why Phyllis chose that topic, how she got there with that. And I'm intrigued by the title of this book as well.
Me too.
But I
I
want
know. I
to,
can
yeah.
go ahead.
No, go ahead. The title is amazing.
Yeah, I just realized after I finished reading it that she and I have been talking about the book and about our launch party for a little while now, and I realized that I didn't know why she chose the title that she chose. And since I finished the book, it didn't become clear to me. So I feel like it might be related to the great grandfather, which comes into play at the end, just kind of the long reach of the shadow of discrimination or something artsy like that. So
No,
um,
yeah, I think that's exactly it. I read it twice before I really got it. And I
yeah.
realized that the long shadow, I think, and we'll have to, it'll be fun to hear what the author has to say about this, what Phyllis says, because I thought the symbolism was very bold. The long shadow from 1923, we still have that shadow of prejudice throughout our culture. That is a scary thought, but it also, the way the story's done, allows
Mm-hmm.
you to live that experience as opposed to being told. How do you feel about that? Because I've done a lot of history lessons, and I remember as a kid going through history lessons. How would this incorporate well, you think, with young readers in for as far as historically?
Yeah. So we've talked in the past about just I'm a homeschooling parent and just the kind of literature that I prefer. And so the philosophy that I, loosely base our homeschool on is the Charlotte Mason philosophy. And she has her like kind of the cornerstone of education for Charlotte Mason homeschool is living books, which she calls living books. So not textbooks, like not learning about these historical events and their timelines, but kind of reading a narrative about what it was like so that kids can actually picture it in their mind and kind of feel the reality of it. So, and this book was definitely that, just being able to kind of go back into history and especially the scenes from the 1920s. I felt like that's really um, it was really vivid, just the characters and the way they dressed and the way they talked to each other. And even when they were going back and forth, the people who were actually, in the 1920s talking to Richie from 2019, saying things like, you need to, you don't speak the way we do. You don't have the same customs as we do. And it was very, a glaring difference. So I enjoyed that and thought that my daughter will enjoy reading that and learn a lot from that as well. Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
I think that's what's so exciting about a good author can take a lesson like this in history and allow us to take that journey instead of a
Mhm.
tour. So I think that this is one of the most incredible magic skills of an author is to be able to take an event like this, a true historical event, and make it so interesting. It's like taking this really important message and just wrapping it into a page turner and adding that fiction to it and taking us on that journey. So you've lived it, you've felt it in the place of a character, as opposed to being told what it was like.
Mhm.
And to me, that is the magic of stories and why we always keep writing stories.
Can you tell me what you thought about the development of the character of Richie, since he's the book is told from his perspective, so he's pretty much the main character, about his development and changes in attributes and attitudes and stuff like that.
It's a dramatic character arc, and it's a pleasant one. It's fun to follow. He starts out as a very typical 14-year-old boy, at least in my opinion, very typical. He even mentions that the segregation that you see in our, even today in 2019, where, or in his time was 2019, one side, the North is the black, the South is the whites. And that's the way it is. And it's still that way back then. So it was interesting. He goes from that very self-centered, he's having a miserable life, not liking living with his aunt, to opening up and growing as a human being. As he turns into a young man, actually, is what happens,
Mhm.
because he looks outside of himself for more things than he originally did, and realizes that there are things in life that really should be changed. There are things that he can actually affect. And then, of course, I'm not going to give it away, but the twist at the end was delicious. I just loved it. And I think everybody's going to enjoy that twist at the end of this book. So, yes, he definitely grows as a character and begins to understand not only the woods by meeting the hunter that he meets and his attitude, but just the interaction that he has with all the townspeople. We go from 1969, and then we're back in 1923, and he definitely firsthand experiences what it's like to be mistreated just because you're a certain color, a certain place you live. The story, long answer is, it was a very satisfying character arc.
I also appreciated kind of the development of his value for friendships and his role as a friend, because he was pretty isolated in the beginning of the book. Like, he had a couple of buddies that he went camping with, but as he became, more involved in Morris's life, he really, like, wanted to be his friend, and like in all the things that means, not just kind of like, hey, how are you today, but really, looking out for his best and his well-being. Okay, so how about memorable scenes that you can think of, or the most? There were a couple that came to mind when I thought of this question.
I know there were so many really good, memorable scenes. I think one of the ones I really enjoyed was the first time that he got picked up by the box truck, and he hears the music, and the reader begins to realize that he's no longer in 2019. That was very memorable for me, because I went, oh, okay, now I know what's going on. This is amazing. This is going to make it so much easier. This is a discussion that you can have with your child. This is a book that you could read together, and you can discuss all of the nuances. You could read it chapter by chapter. You could each read it and then discuss it later. But I think this is a much better way than looking at one of my kids and saying, don't you realize what it was like back then? Because you know what? They really don't care what it was like back then. It's not like that for them. But when you take them on that adventure, and you get a writer like Phyllis, who puts such a different twist on this historical event, it makes it palatable, more than palatable for young people. It makes it engaging for them to read. And that's not an easy thing to accomplish with history and events, and especially something that is such a sensitive topic like this. Who wants to discuss lynching, right? Yuck, nobody, but it happened. And then again, we go back to the title of the book, and what an amazing, her insight in that, calling it the long shadow. I look at it like that is a shadow that is cast way back in the 1920s or sooner. And we're still underneath that shadow today. And not as bad, but we are. So what a cool title she came up with.
Okay, so that is actually all of our review questions. So we're just gonna see if we can grab Phyllis and then talk to her about the book. I don't know if she can hear me. Probably. Oh, there she is. Okay.
Hello.
Hey.
Welcome.
So, well, I guess we're going to ask the first question that we always ask, and then Cherie, if you can continue with other related questions. So, Phyllis, why did you write this book?
Well, I've had this feeling of, this huge injustice going on around me since I was a small child. And it's when I was a small child, I lived in Mississippi, and it was during Jim Crow, the segregation era, and there were whites only water fountains. And I remember going into a store, a shoe repair place with my mother, who was a Yankee, by the way, and she was conducting her business. So I just flopped down into a chair. And as we left, she said, well, you were sitting next to a black man, and that's not the local custom. And I'm going like, like what I do. But anyway, just things like that caused me to, it's just not right. And then my husband and I, soon after we got married, moved into a Black neighborhood, and that's where we raised our children. And I got to know our neighbors. They were such wonderful people. They just folded me right into their lives, and they were so gracious. Uh, and I could see how the Black community sticks together and loves each other and so on. I'm sure there are other instances, but it's very markedly different from what I'm used to as a white person. And I don't know. I just wanted to write about it. It was heavy on my heart that I should write about this. So it was a search for justice. I'm trying to bring justice.
But 1923, James Scott, Columbia, Missouri. Why that? Why that event?
Well, I did so I've been working on this book for, probably 10 years. I don't know. So I decided there had to be some reason why Morris was hiding in the woods. And I thought, okay, well, that would make a good reason if his grandfather had been lynched. So I looked around in the historical record, and there was James Scott. And that, as far as I knew at the time, was the most recent lynching in Missouri. That's actually not true. There's some others, I guess, but that's the one that I zeroed in on. And that one turned out to be a great choice because I could do all this research. In Columbia, Missouri, where it happened, is a college town, and the place is just crawling with, grad students who are looking for something to research. So there's a lot of research about what it was like in 1923 for the Black people, believe it or not. If it had been any other town, I wouldn't have had all that material.
Mm.
So it was pretty nice. And, there's this eyewitness guy who was a newspaper reporter. He was a student at the University of Missouri, the School of Journalism. And he was a stringer for the New York Times. So this story made the front page of the New York Times like a day or two later. And, like where else but Columbia could that have happened, really? And this guy was gifted. I put him in the story. Do you remember him?
Yes.
Yeah. So, yeah.
But no one was ever held accountable for that event, were they? For that incident?
Well, they were tried and found innocent, or whatever you want to call it. Yeah, because their peers thought it was fine. They thought it was fine. Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's heartbreaking.
Were any of the characters drawn from your own experience? How did you create Richie and Morris and Anna and Sarah and all the different characters? Were any of those drawn from your experiences, or are they all?
Oh, I don't know. Some of them are kind of composites of people I know, but yeah,
I'm so curious though. I mean, this is such an emotionally charged event, and you took it and you made it into something very readable and something very engaging. And I look at that and I think, how did you think to send a 14-year-old boy like this back? I mean, where did all the ideas come from? That's what people always want to know from writers. Where did you get all these ideas?
Well, I started out with Richie being in 1969.
Okay.
Being a 1969 kid. And then somebody pointed out to me that it's harder, historical books where your protagonist is also historical. It's harder for a kid to latch onto, the reader. So, a contemporary protagonist is easier. So so that required time travel. So once I had time travel, I thought, okay, well, instead of just talking about Morris's grandfather, let's just go back and see, why not? So we did.
It's well done to take a historical event like this, add some sci-fi to it, and create a timeline and a story. Again, it was very engaging.
Thank you.
Okay.
I was wondering why you could have not had the character of Silas. Why did you put him in? We didn't actually talk about who he was when Cherie and I talked about it.
So he was a person who got in the way. He was an antagonist in
Okay.
1923. Well, you just kind of need it for a good story. You got to have conflict. You got to have an antagonist. So that's where he came from. Nowhere in particular, you know.
So you didn't have in mind to have him show up again at the end? Was that something?
No, that was
Okay.
a kind of something I thought of late.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I was wondering if that was related to your book title, if that specific family relationship was, or
Well, the book title
does fit.
is just just a metaphor, as Cherie was guessing, just a metaphor for crimes against Black people and how they just have this effect, in even down to the present day, even though it was how many years ago, so long ago. So it's and it's not just the lynchings; it was like slavery. It's staggering, the crimes.
And as Sarah said, I think we both guessed right, Sarah, that the title of it is I think it's a very, to me, I found it after the second reading. I looked at it and I went, oh, the light bulb went off, and I went, yeah, that's a very I think it's just a real powerful theme that you put in there. I love the title of the book, and I think that's as much of a message as the rest of it, that we're still under a bit of a long shadow, and that to me is very impactful to the reader. So yeah.
Oh.
How long did it take you to write this book? How long have you been working on it?
Well, I've been writing on it, this, and I had several other versions that had different protagonists, different, but the same theme, like a white kid learns something about race. So yeah, probably at least 10 years, or maybe longer, 12. Yeah. So I've got all these other books or drafts or whatever you want to call them with different characters, but I don't really want to go anywhere with it. I think you only really need one book on that theme. It's just so overwhelming that my future books will probably be kind of, different.
It won't be the same story.
Right. Yeah. Same story over and over again with different characters. No, I don't want to do that.
So ideally, where would you like to see your book wind up? Who do you want reading this book?
I want a lot of people to read this book. That's what I've gotten, that kind of feedback from a number of my endorsers, that they think it's not really just for kids 10 to 14. It's really thought-provoking for anyone. So that's what I would like.
Okay.
For any parents out there listening, thinking or considering this for their child, I thought one of the reasons kids would enjoy it is there's just so much from his perspective. I mean, it's all from his perspective, but just the experiencing the woods and then the different kinds of people. It's just like we didn't ask this question when we were reviewing it, but like, what does it feel like, or does the author capture what it feels like to be the main character? And I thought, yes, it definitely does. It's not like it's being told to you, the story is, per se. It's more like you're kind of like with Richie and kind of walking alongside him. And my kid will definitely enjoy reading about being in the woods. And do you do that stuff, Phyllis? Did that take a lot of research too for the camping stuff? And
well, believe it or not,
because a lot of it was very detailed.
Yeah, I actually was, I have a son who needed a shadow in Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts. So I was his shadow. So I've been there.
I love the acorns. I had no idea you could eat acorns.
Yeah. Well, some of that stuff I got from internet,
Yeah, but it was great research, because I've never known that you could eat acorns.
Yeah, I didn't either. I used to make mud pies with acorns, you know.
We could have been making real pies.
I could have.
Yeah, we were always told they're poisonous, don't eat them, you know, and
Right.
Richie knows that right away. So that was interesting. Oh, I'm not eating those, you know. And then when he trusts Morris enough to eat one of the acorns, and Morris explains, well, you have to soak them for 2 to 3 days. I had no idea you could do that. So there you
Yeah.
go. You learn something new. But I definitely, I know what Sarah's getting at. I definitely had the feeling that you knew what it was like. I camp a lot. So I know what it's like to have your feet soaking wet and really feel like they're frozen and numb. And to be stuck out there in a storm or when it's raining or to take shelter. So yeah, the feeling was definitely, there was a presence there. We were with Richie the whole time.
Great. I'm glad to hear it.
I
Okay.
definitely also felt the tensions. Like when he showed up at Morris's family's house, I was like, what's going to happen? So,
Sometimes I was just sitting there yelling, run, just run away. Don't deal with these people, just run away. Because you knew it wasn't going to turn out well most of the time.
This is
They
the
didn't treat him that well either. So it's not as if, you know, they treated him better than the Black community, but he certainly wasn't treated much better. And when he started straying over, talking with them and actually interacting with them, you could feel the bristling, the tension of the townspeople, how they bristled at him and said, you know, who are you from? And
oh,
he would
you're talking about 1923, the
yeah,
townspeople. Yeah, they could tell he was not one of them just because of what he did and how he thought.
I think even in 1969, they were wondering because of some of the terms and some of the language that he used. It was just different than what they were used to. So even in 1969, they were wondering, you know, where he came from.
Right. He was talking about Coke Zero, and they're going,
I know, I love that. I just love that reference. Coke Zero. Well, we got Coke. Can you imagine back then? Yeah, who'd have thought that we'd have like 19 different kinds of Coke to drink? As if one wasn't enough, right?
great.
You captured, see, one thing. That's another thing about the way you wrote it. Just those details were brilliant, just to bring us into it and make us relate to the character as well as the time period. You didn't beat us over the head with what was going on in 1969 or the headlines of the newspaper. You just you brought us there and sprinkled those details in.
if you look behind Phyllis's hat, you can see a picture of the cover, and I think she's going to hold up a copy of the book. There you go.
There
So
it
The Long
is.
Shadow
The Long
by Phyllis
Shadow.
Wheeler.
Yep.
Check it out. When is it officially coming out, available for purchase? I cannot remember.
June 1st.
June 1st. Okay.
Yeah.
So please check it out. If you're a homeschooling parent, there's nothing in this book that will make you cringe, promise.
Yeah.
Thank you to Cherie for coming and reviewing this book with us. And yeah, we'll see you next time. Check
I have
out
one
Phyllis's book.
comment that I'd like to make on behalf
Sure.
of all of us authors out here. Please, when you read the book, and I know you will, write a review. Go to Amazon, Goodreads, Barnes and Noble, because you can cut and paste. Just write one review. It can be 3 lines. It doesn't really affect how long the review is. We'd love to know what you think of this book. And the only way that authors in any genre can know that they're hitting the mark with their readers is when we get reviews, because the reviews definitely drive the market for books. So tell us what you thought of it. Give us a review. Let us know, because we're going to be looking for those reviews up there. Again, it can be very short, but do take the time to go on up there. Give us a review. Let us know, good or bad. We want to hear about all of it.
All right. You heard it from the author's mouth. Thank you.
Thank you. All right.